do the Mamer Sholom Rov Lo'ohvi Seresacha. The Rebbe said this Mamer on Mוצאי Shabbos Parshas Vayeshev, which was Mevorchim Achodesh Tevis, and the Rebbe said this Mamer in his room in the year Tovshin Lamed Ches. Later on, they published this Mamer in a booklet that came out in honor of Yutas Kislev Tovshin Mem Ches for the honor of the Chag HaGeula of Yutas Kislev, which is coming upon us, which is the day that the Alter Rebbe was freed from his imprisonment in the year Tov Kuf Nun Tes. And the date on the booklet is the 15th of Kislev, Shnas Hakil, Shnas Tovshin Mem Ches. So approximately 10 years later, the Rebbe said it Lamed Ches, and they printed Mem Ches. We'll learn the Mamer inside. In this Mamer, the Rebbe explained that there is two levels. The level of Sholom Rov, based on the Frierdiker Rebbe's Mamer, a great Sholom, Stam Sholom, and the Rebbe explains that of Oyav Sechel means not just loving, learning Torah, it means loving Torah Sechel, loving the Eibishter who gives the Torah. If we reach that level, then it's not just plain Shalom, then it's a level of Sholom Rov. That comes through Avodas HaTfilah, through the level of Bittul. And not only do we bring down a higher level in the one who learns Torah, but when we learn Torah Lishma, we are actually bringing down Baruch Hu Torah. They bring down a higher level within the Torah, as we'll see as the Rebbe develops the idea as we learn through the Maimon. B'siyat the Shmaya, Mוצאי Shabbos Parshas Vayeshev, Mevorchim Achodesh Tevis Bechadro ha'tofshin Lamed Ches. So Sholom, the Maimon is Sholom Rov Laohvi Seresacha, which is the pasuk in Tehillim, which we say at the end of the davening before Aleinu in the morning davening. So we say the pasuk Sholom Rov Laohvi Seresacha ve'en lo mein michshol. So what is the meaning of Sholom Rov? Umedayek kvoit kedushas merichomu admur b'mamori dibur hamaschul zeh. So my father, the Rebbe, in the Maimon that opens up with the same opening of Sholom Rov, that he said the Shabbos Parshas Vayeshev Tovshin Dalet. This is the portion of Vayeshev in the year Tovshin Dalet is when the Frierdiker Rebbe said this Maimer. And Shebehemshech La Maimer Dibra Maschil Podo Besholim Yutas Kislev Tovshin Dalet. This Maimer is a continuation to the Maimer of the of what was said on Yutas Kislev, and the Rebbe says that in Tovshin Daled was the same setup as in the year Tovshin Memches. That's not in the year the Maimer was said. The Maimer was said in Tovshin Lamed Ches, but that's the setup, meaning when they published the Maimer, so that the dates were similarly was as the Rebbe brings out in the note over here. So in any event, in that Maimer uh, of Shabbos, and it came out then, as the Rebbe says, that came out on Thursday and Friday was Yutas Chav Kislev, and then came the Shabbos Vayeshev. So this was a hemshach to that Maimer. So he asked the kasha over there, the question the Frierdiker Rebbe asks, Mahu inyan Sholom Rov. What is the idea? Lots of peace. What means Sholom Rov versus would be ordinary peace? Shemizah move on. So because you say Sholom Rov, it's understood. Sheyesh Sholom Stam. There is plain Sholom, and then there is Rav Sholom. Or the way the language that Rebbe brings down from the Maimer, Loshna Maimer Shom, Sholem Me'at. There is Sholom Rav, and then there's Sholom Ma'at. The Sholom Stam, Sholom Ma'at, meaning there's two levels in Sholom. And there's Sholom Stam, and then there's Sholom Rav. So, what is this two ideas of Sholom? Another question that he asks over there, why do we say that the Sholom Rav is those who love Torah? Why don't we say to those who study Torah? Halei Torah hi chochma bina. Torah is wisdom, understanding. That's intellect, shul, as the verse says about Torah. Ki hi chochmaschem uvinaschem. That's your wisdom and understanding. That's your chochma and bina. In the eyes of all the nation, lein hagoy. So, since this is a matter, Torah is a matter of intellect, so it should say not the ones who love Torah, but it seemingly should say to the one who study Torah. It would be fitting that he should use a language of study, which is attached, or which is connected, study to Chochmah Bina, understanding of Bina you study. It relates to Chochmah Bina v'loy b'loshen ava, but not the language of love. Seems that Torah should be more fitting to those who study Torah, which is wisdom, not those who love Torah. Love doesn't seem to be going with Torah. So Taka, the Rebbe explains over there that we're not talking about the level of plain study of Torah. That's not what the discussion of this pasuk is. When the pasuk says that there's lots of peace, he specifically uses the loshon oihave, those who love Torah secha. Oivet Torah secha, he who, so it explains there, those who love your Torah, who sha'oivim es ha-Torah, that they love the Torah. Loy rak mitzad ha-Torah atzma. Not just for loving Torah itself. Torah itself would be mitzad ha-chokmah shabbat. That's the wisdom of Torah. But ki'im mitzad noisen ha-Torah. They love the one who gave the Torah. They love Torah secha. That is your Torah. The fact that they love the Noisen HaTorah, that is the level of what we're talking about over here, is not just the study, understanding the wisdom of Torah, but the giver of the Torah, which is Seresecha, Oive Seresecha. V'zahu Sholom Rov Laohvi Seresecha. Now we understand the two levels. There is a level of Sholom Rov that goes for those who reach the level, not just loving Torah as it's on its own, but they love the Hashem that gives the Torah. Laohvi Seresecha. Shana Shalom Shenasa Lidei Limud Torah Stam. If you just learn Torah, Takeh, over there, who Sholom Stam, Sholom Ma'at. Sholom Shenasa Lidei Limud Torah Stam. If you're just learning Torah, not Torah Secha, not Oihave Secha, but just learn the Torah, is plain Sholom. Who Sholom Stam, Sholom Ma'at. That's plain a little Sholom. But when you love Hashem who gives the Torah, when the study of Torah is not just that you love Torah, but also with the love of Hashem. And the Rebbe adds, if you learn Torah with love of Hashem, not just loving Torah, the wisdom of Torah, but you love Hashem. And that also would include loving another Jew. Because loving another Jew is a way to love Hashem. when you study Torah with love in your heart for another Jew, which is also brings you on a vessel to the love of Hashem, then you get the Sholom Rov. So that's what he says. We'll move on. The Rebbe adds in the bracket. The move on Shagam Ba'avas Yisrael, not just with Avas Hashem, but also Avas Yisrael. Shara Avas Yisrael Kli Lavas Hashem, because loving another Yid becomes a vessel to the love of Hashem. If we're saying that you have to learn Torah with love of Hashem, you have to learn Torah with love of another Yid, because loving another Yid becomes the vessel in order to love Hashem. To the extent it's not only, though you can't even separate between loving a Yid and loving Hashem. When you learn Torah with love of another Yid, with love of Hashem, Nimshach Sholom Rav, then you get the greater level of Sholom, Shalom Ilam Sholom Stop, which is higher than regular Sholom. When you just learn Torah because of the Chokhmah of Torah, and then you get Sholom, but you get plain Sholom. When you learn Torah with love of the Neisen HaTorah and love of another Yid, then you get Sholom Rov. So, how do we come to love Torah? Not just to learn Torah, but how do we come to love Torah? In order to love Torah, we have to have the introduction of Avodas HaTfilah. During the davening, we stand in the level of subjugation to Hashem. And after the davening, then we can learn Torah in a way of love. Let's look inside. Base. This idea of that the love for Torah is because of the one who gave the Torah, is because of Hashem. So the above Mamer of Sholom Rov from the Friedrich Rebbe, that becomes through the introduction of service of davening. While davening and learning are two separate avodas, yet there is an impact from avodas hatfilah when it comes before the learning, that the learning is on a higher level. You can learn in a way of oyavei seresachol. And the idea is that take to serve the Eibishter is to bring yourself to love Hashem. That's the service of the Eibishter. And that's really what davening is all about, is to inspire yourself and to arouse in yourself that level of love to Hashem. And then that becomes the introduction for your Torah. The main service is to love Hashem. That's the service of a Yid, is to get to love Hashem. Kemaimer, as the saying goes, Leis pulchano ki pulchano derech musal. It's from the Zohar, that there is no service like this service of Ahava. That is the service. That's the avodah. Avodah is to love Hashem. Now, this love of Hashem, how do you get that avodah? How do you get to love Hashem? That comes mainly through davening. In the davening, we work hard to get to that avodah of loving Hashem. This also is connected to the line of avodah to tefillah. Service is the idea to get to love Hashem. Klolus inyan ha'avoda inyan ha'tfilah. This is the general idea of what we work for in davening. What's the idea of davening? The idea of davening is to get to love Hashem. Ki ha'avoda v'hayigia detfilahu. The service and the hard work, the effort of davening is lavoi la'avas Hashem, is one should come to loving Hashem. Zehu she'inyan oyavei soresecho hu al yidei hagdomas avedes hatfilah. And this is the idea that oyavei soresecho, to get to the level to love Hashem, which we are talking about in the study of Torah, comes through the introduction of Avedas HaTfilah, about the service of davening, because the davening is what brings the person to the level of love. The Al Yidei HaTfilah, Ubol Avas Hashem, through davening he comes to love Hashem. V'al Yidei Zenase Oyavei Seresecho, then he becomes a Seresecho Sha'avas HaTorah Shaloi. In Mitzad Neis NaTorah, that the love of Torah is the Neis NaTorah Kinah. Bezehu. How do you become to the level of Oyavei Seresecho? Comes first through the Avedas HaTfilah. Then that brings you to the level that you beloved the Torah, the giver of the Torah. Sha'avas HaTorah Shaloi, Himitzad Noisen HaTorah. Now that the love of his Torah is because of the Eibishter who gives the Torah. B'zehu gam mashemevur bekama mekoimis. This is also that which is explained in many places. Be'inyan tfilas Abba Binyamin says, it's brought down that Abba Binyamin would pray shetehei tfilosi smucha lemitosi in the Gemara in Brachos, that his prayer should be next to his bed, meaning he should daven as soon as he gets up and then learn Torah afterwards. So why is he so interested that the Torah should be as soon as the tefillah should be gets up? Because the learning of Torah that follows davening is in a higher level. Shamai leslimudat Torah hu. The advantage of the study of Torah is kshuhu bo la'achrei hatfilah, is when it comes after davening davke. Hagam. So even though these are two separate, there's tefillah and there's Torah, but the greater level of learning Torah is when it follows davening. Hagam sha'avodas hatfilah hika b'fnei atzmei. The Talmud Torah hika b'fnei atzmei, even though that the avodah of davening is its own line, and learning Torah is its own line. There's different areas, so one can argue. So what's the got to do? You learn whenever you need to learn, and you daven whenever you need to daven. Why are we connecting them? But still, there is an advantage of the Torah that comes after davening. When you introduce first the service of davening and you bring about the love of Hashem, the study that you study is on a higher level. To the extent that it becomes the level of Oyevei Seresecha, you love the Noisen HaTorah. The Rebbe is going to explain further the level of Avas Hashem in Torah, that Torah itself gets to be a higher level through the level of bittul and davening that precedes limud Torah. Yuvan Zebahagdi Mamer will understand this idea. What does tefillah accomplish that the Torah makes it in the highest level? By introducing the saying of our sages of blessed memory, Allah Pasik, The verse says, Al Mo of the Ha'aretz. Why was the land destroyed? Pasuk in Yirmiyah. So it says, because Al Ozvam Es Toi Rossi. They neglected the Torah. So what does it mean they neglected the Torah? So the Gemara translates that. They learned Torah, but they did not make the bracha of Torah before they learned Torah. So you see that making a bracha in Torah is something very important, and it's really something very central to the study of Torah, because the fact that we say, because the fact that we say when they didn't make a bracha in Torah, it's not only we're saying that the people didn't reach the level, we're saying Ozvam es Torah, that's called neglecting the Torah by not making the bracha. So not making the bracha, it's not only that it caused the people not to appreciate the Torah as it should be, but it actually is considered that they neglected the Torah. The Rebbe will explain now that you have the Torah in of itself, and then you have the fact that it becomes Torah si, my Torah. If you don't make the bracha, you don't have the avodas hatefillah, you don't have the level of bittul before you learn Torah. So the Torah is actually missing out some of its greatness. It's not Torah si, it's Ozvam es Torah si. Look inside. The Mizem move on, because it's the pasuk, the Gemara says that is leborchu b'Torah tchila, it's considered neglecting the Torah. It doesn't say that they didn't study Torah, but that's called neglecting the Torah. The Mizem move on. This concept of making the bracha in Torah in the beginning before you learn, hu inyan ikri, that's something which is an important main aspect. Not just that in the service of a person we have to make the bracha in order to sustain and to stay in Eretz Yisrael. Of the Haaretz, the land was destroyed because they didn't make the bracha b'Torah. So it's not only that there is lacking in the people's avodah because they don't make a bracha, and such an important thing is that the land was lost because they didn't make the bracha. But this is also something which is missing out. The Torah is missing out if you don't make the bracha. Why? How does the Torah call the fact that they didn't make the bracha, that they neglected the Torah? That means that not making the bracha is not doing it the person right, but the Torah is neglected. There's something missing that you neglect the Torah, what you should be doing. If you don't make the bracha, doesn't mean that you neglected the Torah, because there's two parts. That's why we say, the pasuk says, Ozvam es Torah si. If you don't make the bracha, you may have Torah, but you don't have Torah si. Al ozon, this is considered neglecting Torah si if you don't make bracha b'Torah tchila. Nikra bakos ozvam es Torah si. Elosh ein zazivas haTorah b'chlal. But we're not talking about that. It means that you totally neglected the Torah. Ki'im kiloshin hakosuv. But as the pasuk says, al ozvam es Torah si, Torah shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They neglected My Torah, Torah Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If they didn't make the bracha, they may have Torah, but they don't have Torah Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Hine, the Rebbe explains now, because the Baruch Hu Bat Torah is mamshich, a higher level into Torah, and if you don't have that hamshocha, Baruch Hu means to bring down, then you're missing Torah in the Torah that you're learning. Ki bracha u'meloshin hine inyan Baruch Hu Bat Torah tchila. What is the idea to make the bracha in the beginning? Ula hamshich hamshochas bracha v'shefa b'toich Torah. The bracha in Torah means to draw down, to bring down a blessing and a flow in the Torah. Bracha means to bring a hamshocha in Torah. Move on Gameloshin, also the language, if you see, it says Baruch Hu B'Torah. It doesn't say Baruch Hu Lifnei HaTorah. Move on Gameloshin Baruch Hu B'Torah, the L'chayda Havale L'Meimer. Not Al Shelei Baruch Hu B'Torah, Havale L'Meimer, Baruch Hu L'Faneo, Al Shelei Baruch Hu L'Faneo, which is Lifnei Limud HaTorah. Umahu Baruch Hu B'Torah. What is the meaning? Blessing in the Torah, not Lifnei HaTorah. What does it mean in the Torah? Because here we're talking about V'take Bracha B'Torah, to bring down Hamshocha in Torah. Ki Bracha Yimeloshin Hamshocha. Bracha comes from the language of drawing down. Ukemoi Hamavrich Es HaGefen. Mavrich Es HaGefen, one who grafts the vine, meaning that he brings a Hamshocha and he drafts the vine into, so it brings down. So here we're talking about there is a bracha, hamshocha, that the Yid would bring down in Torah if he doesn't neglect the Torah. Is Baruch Hu Bat Torah Tchila, bringing down that level in Torah. And this idea that we say, grafting and things, zriya, netiya, talk about sowing, planting. Sowing is by grain, planting is trees. And this is koila mavrich hasagefen. So we're all talking about planting. Shayich b'myuchad lekan. This has a special connection. When we talk about Torah, we're talking about the level of mavrich is used by bracha all the time, but specifically when we're talking about Torah mitzvahs, that's more connected to the idea of planting, because ki Torah mitzvasehu inyan shel zriya ba'oretz, because Torah mitzvahs is the idea to sow in the ground. Ubaruch hu bat Torah hu inyan hamshochas oiren sabetech Torah. The Baruch Hu Bat Torah means to bring down Eid and Sof in the Torah. Like Baruch Hu Bat Torah means they didn't bring down the Eid and Sof in Torah, because they didn't have the level of bittul, they didn't have the davening before, and so there was no bittul, so they didn't mamshich in Sof. Inyan Eisek HaTorah Lishma. We say a lot of times learning Torah for the sake of Torah. What do you mean sake of Torah? To bring down a higher level in Torah. You're learning Torah Lishma for the Torah, to bring down Ein Sof in Torah, l'shem HaTorah atzmav, not for yourself, but to the sake of Torah. L'hamshich bo gilui Ein Sof shelamayla ma'chochma, to bring down in Torah the revelation of the Ein Sof higher than Chochma. Torah itself, before your mamshich, this bracha, the Baruch Hu Bat Torah, is a level of Chochma. When you make the bracha, which you mamshich into Torah, you bring down Eid and Sof into Torah. It seems like a very outrageous statement to make Torah greater. So this is al derech mashakosu b'sefer haboyer. It's written in the Sefer Haboyer, b'sefer Mayin HaChochma. So David hoy mechaber Torah b'HaKadosh Baruch Hu. David would connect the Torah with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which means that David would be mamshich through his learning Torah. He would be mamshich HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Torah. He would connect them. So Zeu al Ozvom as Teirosi al Shalebarchu Bater Tchilo. So now we understand what's the pshat in the Gemara on the Pasuk. They neglected Matorah because they didn't make a bracha to it. Ki al Yidei Ozva as Teirosi, meaning the Havaya, the Ein Sof. When you don't make a bracha, you don't mamshech the Ein Sof, then it's no longer Teirosi. It's Torah, but not Teirosi. When you make the bracha in Torah, which means you draw down the level of Ein Sof, Hinasis Torah Si, then it becomes my Torah. Shemam Shembo Ein Sof. You bring down the Ein Sof. It's not just Chochmah, it becomes Torah Si, the level of Ein Sof. And when they don't make the bracha first, they don't be mamshich, they're not mamshich the Ein Sof. Who ozlom as Torah, then you neglect. It's no longer my Torah. It's Torah, but not my Torah. Sha Torah oz he kemoishi metzad atzma. Then Torah is as if as it's on its own. Ve'ein nimshach bo gilu ein sof shalamaylo ma'chokma, and it does not revealed in Torah the level of Ein Sof, which is higher than Chokmah. So basically, to get the level of Torah Secho, to get Torah Si, needs the Ein Sof, and the Ein Sof, you bring it down. That's the bracha that you bring down in the Torah. And if you don't do that, you're not neglecting Torah, but you're neglecting Torah Si, the Ein Sof, which is in Torah, because the Yid connects and brings down the Ein Sof in Torah. That doesn't mean that there's no godliness in Torah before the Yid brings down the Ein Sof, because we know that Torah stays in its purity and holiness, whether a Yid is Tameh or not. Behagam, Shegam HaTorah Kamoshi Mitzad Atzma. Although, even as Torah is on its own, before you bring down the Ein Sof, it's still the Torah of Hashem. The Eibishter and his wisdom is one. So when you're saying that Torah is Chochmah, but the Torah is Chochmah, that means that it's united with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we see it in practically application, that v'gam kasher loim da'odom loy tohir, even if a person who isn't pure learns Torah, hidvarav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's still words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shalochein eino mekabelas tumah. That's why Torah does not become tumah. A person who is not pure can learn Torah because Torah does not get affected by the status of the person's tumah. Torah does not receive tumah because it's connected with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As our sages of blessed memory say on the verse, Koid Vorek Ha'esh, Ma Eish Eina Mekabel Tuma, Av Divrei Torah Eina Mekabel Tuma. Just like fire does not become impure, cannot receive impurity, words of Torah cannot become impure. Which means to say, that even though if you're not pure, you cannot learn Torah on the highest level. Then you are not connected. You cannot connect Torah with HaKadosh Baruch Hu if you're just learning Torah b'tumah. And you also don't have no connection to this avodah of bringing down Torah in the beginning to bring down godliness. If you're tamei. But still, even though you can bring down the Ein Sof, you still don't give it any tumah to the Torah. Even Torah of this person who's impure is still words of Hashem. And it's also been compared to fire, which naturally goes up above. So the person, notwithstanding his tumah, while he cannot be mechaber, but yet the Torah doesn't mekabel tumah. So why are we saying that you need dafke the Ein Sof to be in Torah? But the Ein Sof is always in Torah because it doesn't become Torah. That means that it's there before. But the Rebbe says then it's not begilui. And I move on. This that the Torah which is being studied by a person who is not clean, is not pure. And we still say that this is the word, the wisdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He and his wisdom is one. That's obscure, that's hidden. You don't see that holiness of Torah. Yes, the person is not metame, but we don't see that person is studying really Torah Chachmosei. That's hidden. And this is not comparable to the level of Torah, Shehi Torah Si, which is my Torah, Torah Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Gili, which is openly the Torah of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, which is when he's Torah. That's not Shaykhis when he's Tomei. That's when he can be Mechaber and bring down Eid and Sof. Ubefrat, She'inyan Baruch Hu B'Torah Tchila, especially given. So Bichlal, it's not Teirosi, as the Rebbe said, Ozvam as Teirosi. You can have Torah and not have Teirosi. So the difference between Teirosi and Stam Torah is a big difference. But especially since Inyan Baruch Hu B'Torah Tchila has the purpose of to bring down Hu Kenal Lahamshe B'Torah Gilu Ein Sof Shelamayla Ma'achokma. That's the idea of Baruch Hu B'Torah is to bring down. That's not shaykhus unless you learn Torah b'tahara and you learn it with the proper way. So while Torah, even the person who's tummy, still has that connection, but that's a hidden connection. But to bring down the purpose that we do. So first of all, that connection is not open, but to bring down and to accomplish Baruch Hu B'Torah Tchila, you need to be learning in purity, because a person who's not Torah cannot be Mechaber Torah and is not Shaykhis to Baruch Hu B'Torah Tchila to be Mamshech Ein Sof in Torah. As the Rebbe will now continue to explain, which tells us the advantage of learning Torah after davening, because how could we be mamshich and learn it with purity and be mamshich the Ein Sof that comes if it's after davening? Dalet. So based on this, we understand the hamayla shebelimud haTorah shel achrei hatfilah, that the advantage of study of Torah which follows the davening, he loy rak b'negeya la limud ha'odam. It's not only it pertains that the person who's learning Torah after davening is on a higher level. But here we're talking about that the person is mamshich in Torah a higher level. Sha'alimut, the simple thing is, as far as the person is concerned, sha'alimut shaloi shal'achrei hagdomas avodas hatfilah, when you learn after you first davened, after the introduction of serving the Eibush with davening, you become the love of Hashem, the Noitzan HaTorah. But it's more than that. The davening actually brings about that you should be able to mamshich a higher level in Torah. You're mamshich Ein Sof. It's not just that you learn Torah, the person learns Torah on a higher level. But if you learn Torah after davening, then the person's Torah can be mamshich the Ein Sof into the Torah. The advantage is as far as the Torah that is learning. Because the idea of Torah, Hamshochas Eines of Torah, will be Iker Belimudat Torah Shela Achrei Hagdomas Avodas Hatfilah. To bring down the Eines of Torah is mainly When you learn Torah after introduction of davening, that's when you can bring down the Ein Sof. So it turns out that this is actually a maila in Torah that you're able to accomplish to give a higher level in Torah through your avodas tefillah. Why is it after tefillah? The Rebbe will explain how tefillah is bitl. But the idea is in order to draw down the Ein Sof in Torah, who be iker kasher limud Torah who be bitl. It's mainly when the study of Torah is bitl. A yid who learns Torah be bitl can, with self-negation, can bring down Ein Sof in the Torah. How do you get the level of bitl? You need a daven. In order for the study of Torah to be bitl, that comes through the introduction of the service of davening. Tefillah brings the person to bitl so that he can be mamshech himself in the Torah because his learning will be bitl. The hine tefillah hu inyan bitl. Tefillah is the idea. What is davening? Is the idea of subjugation. So at the time of davening, one needs to stand as a servant in front of his master. This is even a greater level of bitl than shema. The bitl of davening, the amida, is a higher, greater level of bitl than even the shema. The lack of any movement and standing and the various halachas are more strict by davening because it's more in the presence of the master when you're davening, more than the shema. The Bekriya Shema also, even though by Shema, even though it's prohibited to wink with your eyes or to make signs with your lips, or to show with your fingers. In the middle of the Shema, you're not allowed to make any of these distractions. There are many areas, many things that one can interrupt in the Shema. But in Tefillah, there's no interruption. The Amida, there's no interruption. But to the extent, you see the big difference, Kriya Shema is done sitting down. Sitting down means that it's settled. That is, and Amida is standing in front with awe. But Kriya Shema Yeshiva. Kriya Shema can also be done while you're sitting. As opposed to davening is dafke when you're standing. To the extent that we say that it says amida means tefillah. That means the prayer. It's brachas. But basically what it means is standing is prayer. It means standing in a way of subjugation. What's the difference sitting and standing? Yeshiva points to settle down. You're not intense, you're not in a level of awe, you're not in front of the king, you're sitting down. As Rashi actually explains, this is what Rashi explains on the verse, Vayeshev Yaakov. So what does Rashi explain? What is Vayeshev? He said, Shabikesh Yaakov Leishav B'Shalva, that Yaakov seek to sit in peace. So Vayeshev is to be settled down, to be relaxed. Ki amitis inyan ha'isyashvus Vayeshev Leishav B'Shalva, because the main idea of settling down, Vayeshev, is to sit in peace. That is what Vayeshev is. So you see, Vayeshev is not intense, it's a relaxed level. Vayeshev, Mashenk and Amida, as opposed to standing, Moiral Bittel. You stand, that represents subjugation. So Vaidei HaBittel Ditfilo, and through the subjugation of davening, which precedes the learning, also the study of Torah that follows the davening, who be bittel is with bittel. And that's how you bring down the Ein Sof. After the davening, when you have that bittul brings down the Ein Sof in Torah. We can say, this is the connection, the two interpretations, the medrash on the verse. The dream of Yaakov, he sees the ladder standing on the ground and the top reaching to the sky. Pirush Aleph. So one interpretation is Sulam Ze HaKevesh Tefillah, that the ladder, that's the ramp, that's the prayer, the ramp which you go up. So that's a level of prayer brings you up. O Pirush Beis, Sulam Ze Sinai. The other Pirush is this ladder, that's called Sinai, which is Torah. Tefillah and Torah. So what's the connection? Is Torah, because through the introduction of the service of davening, nase ilui gam b'Torah, that brings an advantage also in Torah. Shenimshach bo gilu Ein Sof, that brings down Ein Sof in Torah, so that davening and Torah are very closely related. It's the same sulam because they impacted. Torah is impacted by the davening through the sulam of tefillah. The sulam of Torah becomes on a higher level. That brings the idea of Ein Sof into the Torah, and that's specifically by the Amida even more than during the Shema. And while Torah is always connected with Hashem, but the real level of Torah connection is through bringing the level of bittul.